Oopsie doodle.
So I'm sure by now everybody has seen the videos that are everywhere of Iran strikes on Israel. And so I wanted to issue a short and sweet response here. First of all, let's not forget, if you are listening to this and you are an American citizen or you are an American congressman or woman, there are Americans that are suffering right now. There are Americans that just got hit with a devastating hurricane, have had their lives destroyed, entire cities wiped off the map. Do not forget that. Americans need help. Now, on top of the port strike that's going on, I think that should be our priority. Now, having said that, I'm somebody that looks for logical consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And so as Israel has been on the offensive, going into the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, bombing Syria, bombing Lebanon, and everything else that they've done, the justification was October 7th. And the cliche was, don't start a war if you don't want the fight. So let's see if that same logic applies now to Israel enduring airstrikes. Or is it, Israel can do no harm and they're not allowed to be attacked and they're untouchable? Let's just see how that logic plays out now that Israel is enduring these attacks. Now, final statement, and this should be everybody's opinion, aside from caring about Americans first. This is bad. War is bad. Anybody celebrating this on any side is bad. Anybody who's been celebrating any of these airstrikes on any countries and any of this escalation is wrong. War is the last thing we need right now. We need peace. And it's sad that this is going on. It's sad that these never-ending wars continue. But as a closing statement, I say this, I think for the vast majority of Americans, we want nothing to do with it. Leave America out of this. We have our own problems to deal with. Pray for peace, folks. Let's hope this doesn't get worse.
I'm going to pause it right there. I think you can hear me now. Hold on one second. I want to say first, I'm going to lighten this up with a little bit of humor. That's bamboo behind... hold on a second. My goodness. Let me see where we are here. Refresh this for a second. That is bamboo, but that's bamboo behind Owen. Now, I don't know where he is, and I hope he's not detained in a Viet Cong camp. Okay, bada bing, bada boom. We need a little bit of levity at this time, but also, I think I agree with Owen. Again, well, hold on. Let me bring this out here. I checked. We're live everywhere. Let me just make sure I'm on the good mic because I don't want to go too far into the intro rant without being on the proper mic. I think we're on the proper mic. I can bring this out. I agree with basically everything that Owen Schroyer is saying right here. It's an amazing thing. Let's bring this screen up. We have actually sort of been conditioned to think like Ukraine gets to defend its borders, but America doesn't. Ukraine gets to have Second Amendment rights, or we can, supply every civilian with firearms because after all, they're not good for anything. But America, no. We can ship billions and billions of dollars to foreign countries, but not to our own. And we can secure borders of foreign countries, but not our own. And the amazing thing about it, I realized this the other day. It is at least this philosophy that is being promoted by people. It's being promoted by people who have a deep hatred for themselves and a deep hatred for their own people. And so you have, the Biden administration saying borders for Ukraine, but not for America. Second Amendment rights for Ukrainians to fight tyrannical powers, ironic there, but not for Americans. We have foreign aid to rebuild foreign countries as a result of catastrophic war, but not for America as a result of catastrophic natural disasters, forest fires, which may or may not have been natural in the first place. And the rationale, because you have to understand, it has to be rooted in something. Why is someone else good for something that we, the people, and I'll say we, the people, even though I'm not American, you, the people, are not good for it? And it has to do with the fact that the underlying you are the oppressor and therefore do not deserve the protections of the. Will you get out of here? What are you doing? Dude, what are you? Get out of here. Go, move. Get out of here. Go, no, go. Oh, she's stuck on my cord. She's going to pull the computer down. Stop it. Oh, gosh. Look, I'm not going to lose track of my thought here because, geez, Louise, everything is being pulled down. Hold on. Okay. You, the people, do not deserve it because you deserve of the suffering that you get. You deserve of, you're not worthy of the protections that others are worthy of. When foreign illegal immigrants come into America and they get credit cards and they get housing and they boot out homeless people and they boot out veterans from the housing. Well, the homeless people pull up yourselves by your bootstraps and, it's all your fault what happened to you because you're the colonizer, you're the oppressor, and it's not their fault that they had to flee to America. So you leave and they come in. When it comes to the borders, you don't deserve a protected border, but they do. It's deeply embedded in a self-hatred and a shame. Like, you don't get that because you don't deserve it, but they do. And now you're looking at a natural disaster that has devastated multiple states in the Southeast. Well, they deserve it because, climate deniers. I've seen tweets. I don't retweet these tweets because they're not worthy of being retweeted. They actually deserve all of the vilification they can get. There was someone celebrating the death toll and saying, well, I'm sure we got a lot of racists in this. So congratulations. I don't know if they're baiting, if they're whatever, but they do it. And so the idea is like, oh, well, this is a climate denying states. They got what they deserve. If only you had reduced emissions, you wouldn't have had this hurricane. And so you deserve it. But Israel doesn't deserve it, despite, I would say doesn't deserve it, despite having basically provoked a war, which was provoked on October 7, although we're going to get into in a second how Israel can somehow plant explosive devices in the pagers of terrorists across the nation and then cause the batteries to overheat to detonate those explosive devices that were implanted in pagers that were somehow handed out to the terrorist agents, but they couldn't foresee paragliders and bulldozers coming over a border and carrying out slaughter for 12 hours. Okay, I've got my own questions. I've had them from day one, and I've taken flack from day one. You don't get your relief in Hawaii because those forest fires are a result of your exploitation of the environment and your climate denialism. North Carolina, Georgia, you don't get it. You'll be lucky to get the scraps that the federal government will give you after having given $200 billion to Ukraine. You don't deserve it because you're responsible for your own suffering. The Ukrainians are not. They're innocent. It's not like the Ukrainian government walked away from the table of negotiations as relates to the Donbass region, effectively provoking. So no. They are innocent. They need support from American taxpayers. You are guilty. You don't deserve the support of your own taxpayer dollars. And now you got Owen Schroyer. Basically, I think these are all fair points. You want to go knock off Hezbollah leaders one by one, expect a reaction. You've all seen Pulp Fiction. If you haven't, where the hell have you been? Pulp Fiction. You massaged Marcellus Wallace's wife's feet. Maybe you don't expect to get thrown out of a window, but you got to expect a reaction. And so are they going to deal with it? Are they going to draw the world into a World War III? Because, well, we thought we could be dereliction of our own duty to protect our own borders. And then as a result of our inability to protect our own borders, we get to go devastate Gaza. Do whatever. Confirm the conspiracy theories and the stereotypes. Yeah, well, the theory was for 20 years, Netanyahu wanted a war so that he could justify a war with Iran. That was the conspiracy theory stereotype. And what we're living through right now, there won't be very many people who don't say that this doesn't confirm that very conspiracy theory. So they want to go and say, well, my goodness, we couldn't protect our borders. And a slaughter occurred over an extended period of time on what was supposed to be the most secure border of the most militaristically sophisticated nation on earth. And now, in response, we can go plant explosives into pagers, cause the batteries to overheat by some form of a hack, cause them to explode, kill off Hezbollah leaders, go and precision bomb, strike, kill terrorist leaders wherever they are in foreign countries, and don't expect a response? What really drives me nuts. Hold on one second, because this dog is. Oh my goodness! I'm gonna. My headphones are tangled. Get out and don't come back tonight. Hold on. Oh lordy! Get that flipping thing out of here. So. Ugh. Jeez Louise. Okay, we should be good now for the timing. Holy cows. Sorry. What really pisses me off, and I said it when Tyler Hansen was out in Ohio interviewing homeless. It doesn't matter if they're white, black, interviewing American homeless. And I predicted it, and I could tell you that people are going to look at them and say, white trash, black trash, whatever slur you want to say. Oh my God, they're addicted to drugs. Stop drinking. Go get a job. Go get a job. That's what they'll say to the American citizens whose existence is supposed to be assisted by taxpayer dollars. But they'll say, no, you go get a job. You get off the drugs. You quit doing the drinking, even though the drugs are being imported through the porous border that the border czar is not taking care of. And this is going to come up tonight. No, you guys deserve it. But those poor Haitians, those poor Syrians, the poor people who are victims of the consequences of the wars that we've started, they don't deserve it. And so they get the priority. You go to New York, Eric Adams, New York, they deserve the hotels. They deserve the school. They deserve the prepaid credit cards. And then when Eric Adams complains about it, like, holy crap, this isn't sustainable. Well, then he gets indicted. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. That's how these political elite pricks look at it. The people of Lahaina, the people of East Palestine, ironic name, especially the way things have turned out. Well, they should have just been better for the environment. They should have voted for the right politicians. They got what they deserved. And now we got to focus our energies on foreigners because we cannot take care of our own people. And so the cheap way for us to say we're doing good in this world and we are good people is by diverting our efforts to other people who are the consequences of our own foreign policy. Hold on a second. Okay, let's go with that. So that was a distracted, ranty intro. The dog, is she back in? The dog scratches the door to get out. She's paralyzed, so she drags her ass across the floor and gets all of the cables tangled up in her vajayjay. By the way, anybody, you don't want to steal this computer because you have no idea what's on that cable. And so now we're seeing, but I've lived through this. I've lived through this 3 times now. Intifada 1, actually Iraq War 2. Which one was the one? Which Iraq War was it in 88, 89? I think that was Iraq War 2. I remember this. It's like one of the earlier memories that I have. I was in a private Jewish school in elementary school, and we had a teacher. She was young, and she was I was in love with this teacher. It was my first crush of a teacher. And she had family in Israel, and this was when, this would have had to have been Iraq War 2. And I wrote her a letter and said, I hope your family's fine. And then she gave me a kiss on a cheek in front of the entire class. One of my earliest, I will not mention her even first or last name. It's relatively identifiable. And I've lived through this. Like, this is how it goes. There's terrorist attack, there's reprisals, then there's more terrorist attacks, and then there's more reprisals. And it was like, this is a vicious cycle every single time. Iraq War 2, Intifada 1, Intifada 2, and this one now. And this is invariably happens. Iran launches a bunch of missiles randomly or not. I mean, I don't know what the strategy is to just launch these missiles. They get intercepted by the Iron Dome or whatever the intercepting technology is. And then everyone says, well, look at this. This is how necessary foreign aid and foreign, supporting Israel is, because if it weren't for this, the bombs would have gotten through and yada, yada. And then some people at some point in time say, maybe if regional fights were fought among the region, ironically enough, maybe they would end sooner than later. And I say this, you can attach whatever labels you want. You know who I am. You know what my identity is. And I will never say, as a member of a religious ethnic community, my opinion is more valid than yours, or yours is less valid than mine. But we've lived through this. And at some point, you might have to recognize that if you let the kids fight it out without the parents getting involved, the fight might end a whole hell of a lot quicker. much like in Ukraine and Russia. If you had Ukraine and Russia, that war, it's not a war between military equals, nor will there ever be a war that is the case. If you let them fight it out or you let them resolve it on their own, it probably would have been resolved about 300,000 Ukrainians ago. Good evening. How goes the battle, people? I would take questions on this just to see. Like, I don't know if my if I'm just out in left field, if I'm reactionary, if I'm ill thought out in my positions, and at some point I'll have to accept that it doesn't make much of a difference. But before we get into the night, because tonight is not about Iran. I mean, I knew we have to talk about it because as I was live earlier today with Topher Fields, it's not Fields. As I was live with Topher talking about the not Israeli, Australian madness. I saw some, text. What do they call the chats saying, "Did you see what's going on in Israel?" It's like, no, I can imagine. Launch more bombs and yada yada. It's an amazing thing. Like, these freaking entities only have the weapons that they have because of the foreign aid from the countries that facilitated them to have these weapons in the first place. Holy hell. Okay, never mind. Forget it. We're gonna stop in a second. But by the way, if and when the nuclear, we're not going to get there because ultimately, because despite what everybody says about Vladimir Putin being the authoritarian Hitlerian tyrant that they think he is, he sure as hell is not waging a war like he were Hitler. And despite what everyone says about Putin, if anyone wanted to trigger this into a nuclear war, well, they have given the pretext, as much of a pretext as they needed to Putin, who has been somewhat restrained in the response. The idea that Putin is a Hitler-esque global conquest type leader who can barely, I say barely, but maybe he could have done it more, who can barely take over and occupy or operate Ukraine, now has global aspirations, idiotic. Whether or not you push him into that corner where Putin then aligns with China and Iran, who themselves, let's say China, probably has some sort of global aspirations. Oh, it's ironic. He might not have been Hitler from the get-go, but you might have very well turned him into a Hitler type of alliance. But if there were going to be a nuclear war, it would have been triggered already. And I would dare argue that the only one who is showing restraint in terms of not escalating this to a nuclear war, ironically enough, is the one people are accusing of being the next Hitler. But if and when, people, perfect segue. The government's track record on telling us the truth is about as reliable as its political promises. 38% of the U.S. population, that's 117 million people, live within 50 miles of a nuclear plant. But don't worry, they say it's totally safe. Something they said about tobacco, asbestos, and lead paint. Ironically enough, the plants are safe. It's just not the sabotage that's safe. They've got a long history of pretending everything is fine until it's not. Meanwhile, they've been quietly hoarding Radio Guard Ace since 2003. Why? Because when radiation hits, this stuff flushes out the junk that's in your system. Funny how they're prepared, but we're left behind. Much like a certain other event, which we need not revisit, but we revisited it in earnest today. That's why 5G includes Radio Guard Ace in their radiation emergency kit, plus meds for the nausea and a radiation monitor so that you know what's really going on instead of people waiting for the official report. Go to 5gfree.com. Use promo code VIVA for 15% off with millions near potential risks. Why roll the dice when you can actually be prepared? And then, by the way, look, if you're not into protecting yourself against nuclear war, what you could do at the very least is toughen up, people. Hold on, let me take this out because I want to show you. I started doing push-ups. Now, one thing that I know that I have good memory of is muscle memory. So I started doing just push-ups. Do you hear my wrists cracking? I've started doing push-ups. I'm doing about 100 to 130 a day. And I've only started doing it since I got back from California, and I think I can almost see it right now. But bottom line, if you're into it and you want to be healthy, you got to take care of your body, people. After 30, your testosterone takes a dive, dropping over 2% every year. That's a reality, but if you're not the type to just roll over and let it happen, there are naked organs. This isn't some lab-made filler-packed nonsense. 100% pure bison organs, liver, kidney, heart. By the way, go check out Viva Frei Eats Bison Balls. It's hilarious. The way real men have powered up for centuries, loaded with B12, iron, zinc. This is how you keep your testosterone levels high, your energy strong, and your strength on point. No fake ingredients, no corporate garbage, just real raw nutrition straight from nature. Go to benaked.com, use promo code VIVA, and you will get 15% off. Those are our two sponsors. The links are in the description, and we thank them. 5G and Be Naked are partners with Rumble, building the parallel economy and doing what needs to be done. Barnes is in the house, sir. I love this. It's like crashing. Robert, am I out in left field? Am I crazy? I know that as a fill in the blank, I should be unapologetically and categorically in support of Israel's right to defend against the retaliation from their right to defend and what the hell goes. How does the Middle East, Robert, how does the Middle East find peace? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, or it's not coming through. Hold on. We're not going to do lip reading with
Here I am.
Robert, what would peace in the Middle East look like? And how does it happen?
Well, I think Trump was on that path, which was you need to divide the Arab and Muslim world from the Palestinian cause. And that means aligning with the royals against the Iranians. Instead they're trying to do an inside straight. Support the Palestinians, support Israelis, support Iran, isolate the royals. No, that made no sense at all. It's a continuation of Obama's policies, which made no sense. Trump was on course to reverse that. That's how he got the first, the Abraham Accords to get the royals to recognize and start to work with Israel. That makes more sense.
The royals being the Saudis,
principally the Saudis, but others too. The reason is there's both a religious conflict and a political conflict between Iran and the royals. I mean, as soon as the Ayatollah took over in Iran, he was propounding that the royals were illegitimate, just as he had overthrown the Shah. And so this goes back over a century. And then that became, and the CIA and others converted it into a Sunni Shia dispute in order to stand with the royals against Iran and isolate Iran. Now that backfired in a lot of ways because we decided to fund Wahhabi fundamentalism and radicalism and Islamic terrorism. So there were some downsides to it back then, but now it just made sense what Trump was trying to do. You have to split the Arab and Muslim world from down deep. A lot of them don't care for the Palestinian cause. Just ask the Jordanians, just ask the Egyptians. So that's where there's vulnerability, but you have to play it right. And that's where he could be tough on Israel when it was necessary. He knew how to handle that. Except, and again, did any conflict flare up when Trump was president? It speaks to itself. Did he get the first peace accords since Jimmy Carter? Yeah, he did. So he's already shown what the strategy and the tactics are. And you have to continue to isolate Iran. I'm not a big sanctions fan in terms of efficacy of policy, who it really impacts, how it politically backfires often domestically. But on certain aspects, Trump has good arguments as to Iran. Just because I'm generally opposed to sanctions, that doesn't mean I can't acknowledge that at times it works. It worked against South Africa, and it was working against Iran. But the other thing you do is you have to keep Russia. You can't be antagonistic with Russia, because then you align Russia with Iran, which Russia's been, has done since the Biden administration decided to effectively go to a de facto war state with Russia. So what it does, Russia unites with China, Russia unites with Iran, all three do. All of a sudden, it's a different ballgame.
Well, tonight is the night of the debate, so we can discuss the geopolitics later on. But hold on one second. Actually, I'll bring this up because can I do it tonight? I realized what had happened the other night is I had gotten logged out of Rumble Studio, so I could no longer bring up. Here I can do it. Slim Shagan says October 8th, Allegheny County Courthouse at 9:30. October 8th. This October 8th. Holy cows.
Yeah, next Tuesday. A week from today.
I've been trying to get the Jeremy from the courting to come out. Viva, are you going to come? I'm a local. There's a ton to do for kids. I could very easily find a good reason to make it happen. I don't need any. It's a question of logistically whether or not it's feasible. It's Allegheny. Allegheny?
Yeah, Pittsburgh.
Okay,
so where the Commonwealth Court will be convening. Our oral arguments for Amos Miller's case, the Amish farmer that the state is trying to shut down, is up first. So it'll be up first in the morning.
All right. Now, the purpose of tonight, however, is the Tampon Tim, AWOL, no balls Walz versus JD smarter than the MSM Vance. I have my favorite in this fight.
There's a betting market out on which suit they'll wear, which state will be mentioned first, which topic will be
where
mentioned.
Is it? It's not on. Is it on Poly Market?
Bet online.
It's amazing. I would get in on some of that because that's some fun stuff, and it can't really easily be fixed unless you have access to his speech. In which case, dude, I would get on that. What's it called? Bet online.
Betonline.ag. I think it's also available at BetUS.
Bet. Not that I'm going there right now. Betonline.ag. What does AG stand for?
You know what's fascinating? It's the domicile. They're in Panama, so they're licensed in Panama. They may be originally based out of, and I think it's the country that the domain is based out of.
I'm looking. I'm not saying I'm going to start right now. I'm not going to start right now. I mean,
what was fascinating is they were predicting that Walz would raise the Haitian issue. Do you think that he'll be dumb enough to talk about that issue?
Yeah, I know. What are the odds on that? Because I would easily
overwhelmingly. I think it's like 75-80% chance.
Well, no, see, I wouldn't take it as an overwhelming. I would take it as an underdog. But I think he's going to bring it up and say, this guy, he's going to bring it for the bomb threats.
No, anytime you're talking about immigration, you're losing. You're talking about people eating people's pets. You're losing. That's Robert, not. It's the old Walking Lawton Childs in a great debate years ago, 1994, with Jeb Bush in the Florida governor's race. I actually watched that debate live as a kid. Said, Jeb, you never talk about rope in a house where there's been a hanging.
No, that's true. But he's going to go with the harm that they cause. He might even bring up the criminal complaint. We briefly touched on it.
Loss. I mean, I hope he does.
He will.
That loss. Absolutely.
Hold on a second. Let's go like this. Gentleman's wager. I think he would. I bet you 50-50 he will. $5.
Well, the bet is he stupid enough? So that's how I see it. Are they that politically out of touch that they don't realize talking about immigration is a loser? Talking about I would expect him to talk a lot more about abortion, talk more about, those kind of topics. I mean, he has a tough road to hoe to try to defend Harris and attack Trump under the circumstances where the top issues are all negative to the Democrats. But the more he's talking about the economy and immigration, the more he's losing tonight.
Did you say he had a tough?
But that
he had a tough. He has a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, it's apropos for Harris.
I know. I would. 75. You're only making 25 cents off every bet. Guaranteed, he's going to bring it up. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I would love to do a poll.
Is that because? So you think they think it's a winner?
Yeah, I think they
realizing it's not.
They're going to score point. They think they're going to score points off of bringing the attention to the suffering and the hardships that have brought on by this rampant racism of the Trump campaign.
Newsflash: Haitian immigrants don't vote. Your election is not Haiti. Your election is the United States of America. Talking about being simple. The only people who care about that are white liberals. Ordinary people are like, why are we talking about these people? Well, why are these people here?
It's on.
The cameras. That's right.
Okay, so hold on.
Well, the vice presidential debate coming up in a moment.
Yeah, I'll put this on pause. We're going to leave it in the backdrop. Hold on, Robert. We briefly touched on it on Sunday. The criminal complaint that was filed again by this Haitian not-for-profit, whatever, activist organization. They filed this. Technically. Is it a civil suit or is it like a civil complaint for a criminal prosecution?
There's no such thing as the latter, as far as I know.
Okay, no, because I was under the impression it was sort of like they were filing a civil, not a civil complaint, but rather a complaint to investigate, to file criminal charges, and then if they
unless there's some unique state law provision in Ohio that typically there's no such thing typically.
Okay, and bottom line, it's dead in the water regardless. Like,
it's a waste of time.
Okay, let's see what's going to happen here. I'll bring this up. Oh, yeah, that's okay. Okay. Ooh. Do we want to hear
go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become vice
Do we care to hear? We don't care to hear these people talk. I'll leave it up, and then when we see the debate starting. No, okay, so gentleman's wager. The Walz team is going to bring it up. Here's the question. Is JD Vance going to bring up the tampons?
the odds on were that he would, but I think he'd be better off talking about how disastrous Walz's pandemic politics were,
Yep.
And, bring in Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and those endorsements. And otherwise, the economy, immigration, and risk of world war. And maybe throw in, look at North Carolina. If he brings up Haitians, say that describes this administration and what they'll be. They care more about foreign immigrants than they do people in North Carolina who are dying right now because you can't take care of them.
We got Slim Shagan says, I'll help you. I'll pick you and Barnes up. Well, no, Barnes is definitely going to be there. The only question is whether or not I can get myself down there. Do you think we're going to have a KO or just a major slugfest? Okay, it's on. I think it's going to be a KO. I think
CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS,
there's
on other
no
networks
man
here in the
asking
U.S.
questions
and around the
Oh,
world.
boy.
We have a consequential night ahead. And
How
our
is the
focus
audio
the
level? Because I
issues
can't get it
that
higher. I'm
matter
going to go to
you,
locals
the
and see.
voter. Let's introduce the candidates.
How
Minnesota's
is
Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
JD is going to destroy him. Audio's good. Good. Okay.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to.
Did you cheat?
Questions will be
CBS?
directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points.
Look at the way
with an
they're sitting, like,
additional 1 minute
symmetrically.
each at the discretion of the moderator.
Like a mirror of
The
each other.
primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates.
No fact checking.
Enforce the rules and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set.
Let's do
Governor, Senator, thank
Bring it
you
on.
for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them,
oh my God, this is terrible.
To Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance.
That's good.
What we've seen out of
question?
Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again.
Okay, get to the answer.
Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing.
Climate change.
Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall.
Climate
Senator
denialism.
Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. And Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Perfect.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said, again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now
Did
to
she just
immigration.
end with a
crisis at
fact
the
check?
U.S.-Mexico border
Yeah, that's exactly
consistently
right.
ranks
And
as one
that's
of
why
the
these
top
networks should
issues
never be allowed to
for
host a debate.
American voters.
In the future,
Senator
Republicans
Vance,
should not agree to these networks.
your campaign is pledging to
Stop the
carry out the
dance.
largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be
Yes.
more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 20, 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what? I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and
Oh my
using
God.
kids
Why don't you
as
lead him a
drug
little more?
mules, among other
Lead him
things,
a little more.
hurting
well,
children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history.
Largest
30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human
gosh.
trafficking
He's
and
repeating
drug
her
interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield.
That's Haitian.
The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would through executive action, solve this? Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico. You've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Exactly why I never should have talked about it.
It is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything.
Everything.
On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it.
Americans
It's
don't want all these
funded.
illegals
It's
here,
supported
period.
by the people who
Don't
do
want
it.
all these
And it
asylum
lets us
seekers
keep
here,
our
period.
dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status,
It's the moderator
temporary
who brought it up.
protected
Well,
status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you.
Senator, we have
no,
so
Oh, no,
much
we
to
gotta
get
move on.
to.
We gotta
Margaret,
move on.
I think it's important
We're
because
gonna turn now to the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys weren't
economy,
going to
we're-
fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say
Yes.
what's actually going on.
Yes.
So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the
And
legal
Kamala
process.
laws-
Oh, are they
We have
arguing
so
with
much
him now?
to get
Opened
to,
up-
Are they
Senator.
arguing with him now?
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much-
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
wanna have-
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that
Oh, now they're muting him.
Gentlemen,
Whoever's
you-
watching this, clip this portion
the audience
right
can't
now.
hear you because your mic.
This is why it makes
The audience, I hear
There's
it.
so much we
Allowed-
want to
be allowed
get to.
again
Thank
to
you for
host
explaining the
meetings.
legal
Ever again.
process.
They're proving in the presidential debate
Thank you,
in this
Margaret.
month why they
The
can never be
economy is
trusted,
a top
never do this
concern
ever
for
again.
voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm gonna give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it. It would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best. More people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes
Politicians
with this.
are
And I
experts.
ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15
Oh my
years?
God,
the last
this
year
is
as president.
stupid.
That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
What is the fair
You
share?
have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong.
Tell them what they said about the jab.
They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now.
No, they're
but
not.
look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts,
Success
you heard
leaves
what the numbers
clues.
were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
No, that's a
show.
gross
This is
generalization.
why JD's going to win.
So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim,
Look at him,
I think
look
you
at
got
Tim.
a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made
Look at Tim.
gas,
Look at Tim's face right
groceries,
now.
and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor,
Please.
thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot
That's
to get
a good
to
moment right
ahead,
there. What time are we in
gentlemen,
on
on
this
many
debate?
topics. But right now, I want to talk about
39
personal
minutes.
qualifications.
39 minutes.
The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989.
But you weren't.
But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year.
Oopsie doodle.
Can you explain that discrepancy? You have 2
Yeah,
minutes.
well, and to the folks out
I
there who didn't
misspoke.
get
I
at
had
the
bad
top of this,
grammar.
look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska,
You did the call
town of
answer.
400.
I
Town
grew
you
up in a
rode
middle
your
class
bike with your
family.
buddies till the
He's
street
got
lights
bad
come
grammar,
on, and I'm
Robert.
proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher.
Can you
My
get to the
first year
lie,
out, I got
please,
the
sir?
opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that.
I made a
I
mistake.
came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we
It's
would
not a
take
good idea
dancers,
for him to talk
and we
about
would go
this.
back and forth to China. The
I
issue
love
for that
China.
was to
I
try and
love
learn. Now,
China.
look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at.
And they hate
They-
you, Tim.
Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress,
He's telling a
I was
lie.
one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans
Can he answer
benefits.
the question as
And
to
then the
why he
people of
lied?
Minnesota were able to elect me to governor
He's just
twice.
a knucklehead
So look,
sometimes.
my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it
just
made,
make
the
stuff
difference
up.
it made in my life. I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he
Can
wouldn't
someone
be
meme? I'm a
praising Xi
knucklehead.
Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he
Quote of the
wouldn't start a
debate.
trade war that he ends up losing. So this
Tim,
is about trying to
you're lying.
understand
Get
the
to the
world.
lie.
It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is.
I'm a
My
knucklehead.
commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress,
A
those
liar
are the
of a
things that I
soldier.
think are the values that people care about.
Tim,
Governor,
you
just
lied.
to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the
No, just-
discrepancy?
All
No.
I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So
Oh, you
I will
misspoke.
just, that's what I've said.
Tim, not Tim. JD,
So I was in
jump. Jump
Hong
on it.
Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I kind of lied.
Thank you, Governor.
I misspoke.
Senator
I
Vance,
misspoke
in
about my life.
2016, you called your
What a
running mate
piece
Donald
of
Trump
crap.
unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe
Climate
versus
change,
Wade was overturned,
abortion,
you signed a
anything
bill
but
into
issues that really
law
matter.
that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women.
Yeah, there's
we
no
trust
mothers
doctors.
left.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically,
there will be no
we
federal
have
ban.
a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked when Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman
Aren't they
died
neighboring states?
in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, Why have you changed your position?
Has he though?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not.
This is a
Though I know
perfect
that
answer.
Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may
Vance
be
does need
prosecuted
to
for
respond
providing
to
that
this.
care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is
Until
making
what
the case
date,
to
Tim?
make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator.
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is
Oh, tell us,
fundamentally
Tim.
barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions.
Not answering the question.
And the physicians who know best when
Okay,
they
so-
need to
so
do
then
this.
it's true what he
Trying to
said.
distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong
That is
about?
not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this
exactly
advice
what
on a
the
lot of
law is
things,
written.
that getting involved, getting against, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation
It
of
was
these guys
fact-checked,
to try
according
and
to
tell
Jean-Pierre.
women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just
Keep
mind your own
pushing him,
business
JD.
on
Push
this.
him.
Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health
They
care.
just don't get
So
health
the
care.
Hiding behind, we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a
How is
slogan
it
as a
wrong?
response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move
No-
on, and we're going to be
no
right back
fact
with
checks
much
on
more
this
of the
on media.
CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
We'll put it on mute. I'm just going to go make it trend, hashtag knucklehead. Make it trend, hashtag knucklehead. I will.
So far, Vance is doing really well. The only thing is, I think it'd be useful for him to bring up the Robert Kennedy, all those issues with health, that endorsement, et cetera. The second thing is, this was an opportunity to bring up. He wants to talk about freedom, talk about choice. Remind everybody what his lockdown policies were. That Governor Walz was the guy who created a snitch line, a rat line, for your neighbors to rat you out if you weren't wearing a mask when you went outside your house. that Governor Walz was the guy who didn't respect anybody's freedom and said you couldn't even go to school unless you had a certain vaccine or drugs put in you. You could be fired from your job, and there was no freedom of conscience based on whether or not you took the COVID vaccine. So he doesn't respect freedom at all. He never did. The only freedom he respected was the same one Harris respected when she was busy bailing out all the rioters that rioted in his state during his tenure as governor. That's the combination I would come back to. So but Vance is key. This is like Vance. Vance is going to keep it on intellectual topical level and answer things directly and straightforwardly, which serves him well. But I would like to see those points at some point come into the debate, remind people of how horrible this guy was during the pandemic as a governor, that he doesn't believe in anybody's freedom when it comes to those issues, and incorporate the Kennedy Gabbard endorsements that I thought Trump left off the table by not talking about him in his debate. Those are the only two issues that I want to see him bring up, find an excuse to bring up. Otherwise, he's done a good job of bringing things back to accessible, ordinary, everyday people. That he's not worrying about Walz. He's not worrying about the moderators. He's worried about any new voter that's watching. And his focus on them is, here's how this is going to translate to you.
Everybody who's watching this right now, there's still time before they come back from break. Snip and clip that last minute and tag someone who can. I presume people are watching this, but yeah, absolutely. We see where the second half of the debate goes because they haven't gotten to any of the key points of weakness for Walz on policy. What drives me nuts, however, is that Walz is he's not terrible. I mean, the guy is
but that was about what I expected. They tried to undersell him coming into the debate. He's done this many, many times. So, I mean, he was a teacher for crying out loud. So the idea he'd be bad at debate, that was just media propaganda. So the expectations on him would be as low as possible. This is the oldest game in the book. Democrats play it all the time. Oh, jolly gee, we have no, man, it's going to be so bad. No, we don't even think he can handle it. Oh, no. I mean, it's just pure expectations.
Well, hold on, Robert. We got the soundbite of the night. Hold on.
And I'm a knucklehead at times.
Wait.
And I'm a knucklehead at times. And I'm a knucklehead at times. And I'm a knucklehead at times.
That will echo through the ages. Someone in my Twitter feed said, Stockdale level gaff. Robert, who's Stockdale?
James Stockdale, vice presidential candidate for Ross Perot in 1992.
What was
started off the debate by saying, "Who am I and why am I here?"
Yeah, I'm gonna go check that out. Look, until we get look now the look has been poisoned on me. I want to bring this up because we've got a new member of the community, ND Rose. Welcome to the club, the above average community at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Slim Shagan says, what are the rules? Are they allowed to get information while on break? I don't think so, but the rules mean nothing because they've already been broken. Abortion in Minnesota is illegal at all stages. By the way,
what Vance said was exactly right.
That's right.
They allow that if during an abortion a baby is born,
a failed late-term abortion,
abortion,
yep,
the baby is born alive. They allow the doctor and the parent to provide no medical care, murdering the baby. That's
by the way,
Minnesota that he pushed. And those lying moderators refuse to tell people the truth because that's who they are. One thing that should be crystal clear, this is where I agree with Richard Barris, People's Pundit Daily, no more allowing the media to host debates.
Yep.
No more. That they've proven their incapacity for impartiality.
No, but by the way, and Tim Walz did not even respond to J.D. Vance.
We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause
the next
of
liberal
death
topic,
for children and
climate
teens
change,
in America
abortion,
is by
gun control.
firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible to curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it?
Armed security.
Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90%, and some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions.
I don't even know why he has to be apologetic.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
You need to make him safe.
Well,
period.
I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment
He's a hunter now.
is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools.
Oh.
They don't have
Now he wants
this
to make
happen,
us Europe.
even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference.
Yeah.
It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go?
How about just like a
when
bank?
we know
A bank would be
there's
fine.
countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids.
No, they do bomb
to get a
threats in
fix.
Israel,
These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that. And I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay. First of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools, we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety.
What the hell is wrong with this?
I'm of an age where My shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that. But I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent.
No,
and
but
I think
if
what
you're
we end up
violent, what are
doing
the
is we
chances
start
you have
looking
mental
for a
health
scapegoat.
problems?
Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers
How does that not
and a
result in inflation?
$10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you
Easy
listening
question.
on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising? And what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim.
Turn his mic off.
25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver is paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Oh my goodness, that's bullshit right there.
You have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office.
He'll check it after.
But it's again blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local. Many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One
By
of the
the way,
top problems
Minnesota
facing
does not have
Americans
20%
is the high
of the world's
cost
fresh
of health
water.
care. Senator
Wrong,
Vance,
JD.
at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, I have concepts of a plan. Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill, but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem. And he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look,
Can
people
you
are using
answer
it.
the
The
effing
system
question,
works.
you piece of
And
garbage?
the question about this of young
It's
people or
higher
whatever,
now.
that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then
So
what
you
happens
think the
is
individual mandate's a good idea?
you shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying healthcare once you get past 70. So look, the
You
ACA
shouldn't be
works.
buying
We can continue
Medicare
to do
past
better.
70.
Kamala
You should
Harris
buy
did
into
that.
it
The
before.
way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize.
No,
We're
of course
out of
not.
time. We have a number of subjects to
Shut up,
discuss.
Tim. Shut
Margaret?
up,
Let's talk about
Katie.
families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. but being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare, because look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families, cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the childcare shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the childcare shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6,
Absolutely. More.
as your campaign has promised?
More.
Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that plays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Please provide more
Governor,
childcare.
thank you. We need to move on.
Don't
Nora?
reduce
Let's
the
talk about the
regulations.
state of
No.
democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's
It's like
campaign
every
and
liberal
others
talking point.
filed
Climate change,
62
abortion,
lawsuits
healthcare,
contesting the
January
results.
6th.
Judges, including those appointed
five.
by President Trump
just
and
five
other
right now.
Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. Of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues, and that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But
me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. Yeah. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that.
Like in California.
I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen.
No, it wasn't.
And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
On paper,
Tim,
yes.
I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Oh, by the way, you can yell fire in a crowded theater if there's a fire in the crowded theater.
I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows
hell is he talking
he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News
Closing statements?
Vice Presidential debate continues.
Let me go put it on mute, and then I'm gonna go take it out of our thing. Look, Tim Walz is fine. His face bothers me. I say that because
the weakness. I said from the get-go, stylistically he'll be fine. It's amazing to me that some people on the right always buy into the left's own lower expectations game. It's the same game every debate. It's been this way now for forever. Particularly in the Trump era, because they knew that their candidate would do poorly, so they would have expectations so low that he's debated multiple times His biggest risk factor was losing his temper, which I'm sure they had practiced on many times. I think he was so focused on not losing his temper tonight that he failed to make the indictment. Like one of the bets that I put out at sportspicks.locals.com, where we put out political bets and sports bets and a lot of other things, was that Harris would be mentioned far more often tonight than Trump. And that's a sign by what you have is over and over again, how often has Walz gone after Trump versus how often has Vance gone after Harris? Vance has been far better at making this Harris administration. And Walt's so worried that, maybe I'm going to lose my temper. He's put some little firewalls in his own head to not keep up the indictment speech, to try to often minimize difference. He remembered his one little catch line there. The difference is the choice is democracy or Donald Trump. More loyal to democracy or Donald. These are only talking points with white liberals. These are not, they're singing to a choir that is already on board, that they are not reaching out. Again, same failure as Harris. They are not reaching out at all to the independent swing vote. Vance throughout, as Trump did in his first debate, focused on the issues, how many times did he bring it back to the border? Housing takes it to the border. Healthcare takes it to the border. Crime takes it to the border. Gun control takes it to the border. Again and again and again and again and again. Ties it in over and over again. And look at his other great repartee throughout. They're talking about what Harris is going to do. She's had 3.5 years. You already know what she's going to do, and she failed at it. They're saying Trump's going to do all these scary things. You already know what Trump did because you have 4 years of a record. It's one of the best arguments that Trump has all the way through. That ordinary voters, you can watch TikTok videos and other ones of, your classic democratically aligned voter group, younger women, minorities, millennials, Zoomers, making this exact point. They're like, why are you telling me that Trump's going to do all these terrible things? He was already president for 4 years. There was a video that just went viral yesterday where a young woman was making this point. And it works. So he's kept the core issues, make sure the topics are your topics, focus on indicting Harris. Notice how it's become the Harris administration, no longer even the Biden administration. And I love how Vance flipped it. It's now the Harris-Biden administration. It's not even the Biden-Harris administration. So that was good. Boom, 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 boom. And every time there was a hot topic that they thought they could set him up on, he found a way to transition it to relating to the constituency that cares about it. You could tell he's prepared. Okay, we have issues with sort of younger working class women who aren't really sure whether to trust us. Let me tell you about why I understand young working class women, how I understand that lifestyle. I grew up as a son of a single mom. He over and over again, here's how I understand your concern about healthcare. Here's how I understand your concern about childcare. Here's how I understand your concern about family access. All of those things over and over and over again. Tied it back. Common sense, accessible. Because who is he communicating to? Not to the moderators, not to Walz, not to the professional class in his own base, like Walz has done. He's talking to the independent swing voter. There's a lot of great meme stuff. All the great memes. There's a great little sarcastic look. JD's been obviously watching a lot of Tucker. He did a little eye look. That's fit.
Let me get that one because everybody's saying like every screenshot from this here. This is the one. This is first of all, JD is a good-looking man. You could make fun of his eyeliner or whatever that everybody thinks is wearing eyeliner. That's the image.
That's perfect. That's perfect. See, he borrowed that from Tucker. That's a Tucker type. Tucker's the master of facial gestures.
We're back. We're back.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm an idiot. Hold on. Get it back here. Get it back.
Minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS
I guess
News.
it's
And most
statements.
importantly,
Thank you,
to
America.
all of you. If you're still up and the
Still-
folks who miss
still
Dancing
up.
with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built.
What
From
coalition?
Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything.
War criminal,
but they are
commie,
truly
and pop star,
optimistic people.
and everyone in between.
They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you that that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something, not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you.
I'm biased.
And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora
I did
O'Donnell.
not
And a
like
reminder, there are
hearing
just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News,
Go to hell.
Communist Broadcasting Station.
I did not like the fact that I could hear the of their mouths while they were talking. By the way,
Well,
I
that's who
think
they are.
it might be
they're wine mom, white lefty women who want to run the world and want us to run and want us to be governed by them in every capacity. They failed to ambush Vance at all. They dictated the topics, but despite doing so, he managed to make the number one discussed topic tonight immigration, which is one of the number one issues, and the second, all economic related issues, in which he also tied in the immigration problem too. So and then he did a great job bringing in Robert Kennedy, bringing in Tulsi Gabbard, tying it to issues like censorship. Did a good job adjusting and buffering back rebutting all the issues in a more creative and compassionate way. Notice his demeanor, disposition. He was looking at who are the potential swing voters. I mean, this is a good, know your audience in any kind of presentation. Know your audience. And what is commonly missed, like what Tim Walz missed tonight, what Kamala Harris missed in her debate, was she was talking to her donors. She was talking to her campaign staff. She was talking to her volunteer base. She was talking to the party hierarchy. She was talking to people like these two wine moms sitting there tonight. These type of folks, or people who are proud not to be moms, which is always weird. So that's who. Instead, Trump talked to the swing voter. Vance talked to the swing voter, And Vance knew they're highlighting healthcare and abortion and gun control, these issues, childcare, all to try to sever the working class women from voting for Trump, like many of them are considering doing. And he was able to rebuff that not only substantively by transitioning into topics and issues that were favorable to them, but also his style, his demeanor, his disposition. It's very soft. It was very empathetic. It's somebody who grew up around a lot of women. I mean, with a mama and a grandma raising him, right? So he knows how to talk in a way. It's the opposite of Trump, right? Trump is very uber masculine. This is him reaching out to that specific voter group that's still a little shaky. Everybody knows where they're going to vote when they go in the voting booth. They're going to vote Trump, but they're just giving them the excuse to do so, the reasoning to do so, the justification to do so, and reintroduced himself to that audience. Because remember, this is a guy that's been caricatured by the press to the American public that's never really seen him before on a national stage at all. So excellent stylistically, excellent substantively, excellent stylistically because he's not trying to win debate points. He's trying to win over the voter constituency by the manner and method of his presentation that's appealing to that group. You know, I've changed from over the years, different times depending on who I need to win over in jurors. But as a general rule, I like mamas on the jury because mamas didn't like my presentation style, in part because I grew up with after my father died when I was young. So you learn certain. You can see that in JD Vance. He knows how to say it. He knows what they're wanting to hear. He's knowing how they want to hear it. That they want to see. Okay, you care. You understand. That you're not a harsh preacher like they're trying to caricature the Republican parties. You're not a harsh corporate guy like they're trying to caricature the Republican Party. He defeated that, and then he did a great job of doing something that Trump didn't always do well, which is tie in his economic populism and the hallmark of it, tariffs, over and over and over again. Said, let's build in America. Let's build in America. Let's build in America. Get the government off your back, and the government should be on foreign nations' back. They're trying to steal our jobs. So the brilliant job by him, mediocre by Walz. It's only good by low expectations the media set for him. The guy was a teacher for 20 years. He'll be fine on a public presentation stage. He had many debates for Congress, many debates for running for governor. He lost his temper in the last one, so that's why people were thinking maybe he'll do it again. He wasn't going to repeat that mistake. Problem is, he was so worried about not blowing up badly. He said, "I'm a knucklehead." He said, "I misspoke." He forgot to indict Trump. He forgot to defend Harris. How many particulars of Harris policies do you even remember him talking about? So one little thing here, one little thing there. There was no good retort to the Trump success track. And it was mostly preaching to the base of white liberal women. They're already voting for you, pal. The problem is all the other people who ain't. And he did nothing to persuade that voter group of why they should vote for Harris over Trump.
But Robert, hold on a second. Towards the end, he said he built a coalition from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift. I was like, they say this and they think they're appealing to anybody. You got a commie, a war criminal, and a childless billionaire. That defines the Democrat Party. That's their coalition.
Correct. Whereas who did the only endorsement JD Vance talked about? Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard.
What drives me ballistic when they talk about that bipartisan border bill, why do they not reflexively beat them over the head with the fact that all of the points we've talked about, the jurisdiction to the courts, the funding for Ukraine, the funding for Israel.
Then you get sort of mired in the details. So it's always more it's more effective, I think. So okay, they're still talking about legislation they couldn't get passed. So why are they going to get done next time? I mean and so they've been president. And pretending that you need Congress to authorize the Border Patrol to do their job is simply not the case. Mm-hmm. That's 94 executive orders. You could do something. Pretending you could do nothing while saying, please elect me because then I can suddenly do something is not really a rationale. They don't have an explanation. They thought being open borders would be more popular than negative because they bought their own BS. They bought their own internal nonsense. They have for over 2 decades now. They've built up all the left, center left, and center right in some countries has been preaching this nonsense for 2 decades across the Western world. It has backfired everywhere it's been. But they're only discovering it now in the middle of the election season. And now it's too late. All of her preaching and celebrating and then pretending that any problems that existed were Trump's problems. Everybody remembers 2019. That's the problem. It wasn't 50 years ago. It wasn't 100 years ago. It was just 5 years ago. It was just 6 years ago. And they're like, the economy was good. The world was peaceful. Crime was going down. Immigration was under control. I didn't have all these problems. I didn't lose my health care. The abortion wasn't suddenly made illegal for everybody everywhere. Everybody's going to get locked up suddenly overnight. None of these things happened that they said were going to happen under Trump. There was no, what the censorship didn't happen by Trump's hand. It happened by Harris's hand. The efforts to imprison your opponents didn't happen by Trump.
But Vance didn't hammer that. He could have pounced on that. Didn't.
I think their thought process there is, if they're discussing Trump lawfare, that's a Democratic oriented issue.
Yeah.
So better to instead transition to, why are you censoring people? You say you care about the Constitution. Why are you censoring people?
See, this I lack this discipline to enact. I would have pounced on that, and maybe to my own detriment. Like, you mother effers, you're doing that right now.
Vance came in tonight with he was talking to one group more than anyone else. He was talking to younger, working millennial and Zoomer working class women. They're the last group to come into the Trump fold. They're the last undecideds out there. Everybody else is coming into Trump fold. It's even showing up in the polling that's bad, biased polling for Democrats.
I mean, when the I don't say rappers in a sense of racial identity, but in terms of a cultural movement, when rappers by and large, younger
working class men already have. See, that's what Vance recognized tonight. It's like, we got to remind the old blue collar worker why they got to be on board of the industrial Midwest. You remember what good jobs were like? Remember, and that's where he came back. Trade. The two hot button issues for everybody: economy and immigration. Tied it in again and again and again. Remind people we had peace with Trump for that group of people concerned with war. Norwegians in Wisconsin and parts of Minnesota, other places are those kind of voters. But otherwise, he was laser focused on the second subgroup. So you have the overall group, and then the second subgroup of specific voters who are still undecided. And it was, how do we get these younger working class women who who might be religious but don't go to church, the unchurched, they might, some of them in certain border parts of the country probably identify. You wonder why he knows them. They're his whole family. They're their sister, his mother, his grandmother. He knows everybody that's in this group. People that don't go to church but consider themselves religious, but don't like being preached at. Want real world solutions for real world problems that don't fit into the corporate model, the preachy model, the bureaucratic model, or any of the rest. And he kept talking to them all night, both on policy and in demeanor. And so, I mean, he couldn't have won the debate by any bigger margin in terms that really matter. And what's matters?
Apparently,
voters.
Apparently, David Axelrod is already putting out excuses for
Walz,
for Tim. Yeah, for Tim. But hold on. So the
must
chat
be hard
up
work.
there.
Imagine being with those people. I mean,
what's
just keep spinning this garbage? And notice Walz had he should have known coming in, Vance was going to hit him. Man, saying, man, your job is tough. You got to pretend Trump did a terrible job for 4 years. And everybody knows it was awesome. And you got to pretend Harris did a great job when she was terrible. So you're pretending all the current problems came from Trump rather than Harris, and pretending Harris wasn't in the White House for the last 4 years. Good luck with that. And he didn't have any answer. He had none.
I'm fact checking this chat right up here because I was somewhat taken aback by it. The World Population Review: Finland has a higher mass shooting per million by nearly 0.5 per million. Now, I'm just bringing this up. This is from World Population. I don't know how credible this is. Norway's got the highest deaths per million for annual mass public shootings, and United States.
You have small countries, only a few incidents will make the per capita rate much higher. The other key factor here is how do you define mass shootings?
Yeah, well, that yes, and
like, for example, most mass shootings in America are gangland shootings.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Mass shooting is 2 or 3 people getting injured in a shootout.
No, but that's why you would imagine that even by liberal standards, the U.S. should be higher up because it would include, like, gang banging.
It is by certain categorizations, depending on how you do it. The other connection, there's no correlation at all between gun laws and gun violence. There is a correlation between where there's been slavery and gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I attribute that both ways. Some people try to take it some racist interpretation. I don't take it that way. I take it that the slavery has vestigial effects. You destroyed 5 generations, 6 generations of community. You don't think there's going to be anything lasting from that? So, and then they've, in my view, Democratic policies have amplified that because they want a dependent economic and social group for political power purposes rather than empower them. I mean, in 1960, you had a lower black unemployment rate than a white unemployment rate. And in large part, that was because of wartime related jobs that led to industry. It was the deindustrialization of America that started in urban areas and then moved to the rest of the Midwest that destroyed first working class black communities before it turned. And look at what now you can see in Appalachia. You can see in the old hollowed out factories, the hollowed out lives across those communities. And once again, that's a huge issue in Pennsylvania, huge issue in Michigan, huge issue in Wisconsin, big issue even in Minnesota, but bigger in those other 3 states. And that's why Vance came back to it again and again and again. So he made sure broad topics, defend Trump, indict Harris, check. Number 2, make sure the topics are economy and immigration and peace, check. Number 3, make sure what you're here for, you get working class blue collar voters in the industrial Midwest, check. And last but not least, that last vestigial group, young working class women are unsure about a Republican ticket, why it is you understand them and you're listening to them, check. What did Walz do? Walz talked to white liberals all night. Congrats. You're going to be back to being a loser governor of Minnesota soon.
Robert, let me bring this up because I just noticed you have a $100 super chat over on YouTube. Viva Barnes, help. My opinion is that Trump and Vance have to balance this out with being elected. Walz's face says he is so sad and torn, and I'm holding back my sympathy. I do not enjoy this abuse, specifically elder abuse. Thanks for streaming the commentary. That's from Crafter4. Yeah, Walz did as well as he could be expected to have done. I would have been much more.
He could have been far more effective. They drilled into his head. Don't lose your temper. Don't lose your temper. Don't lose your temper. And thus he was worried about being overly, oh, I agree with this and I agree with that. And oh, yes. And I understand your sympathy there. And he couldn't come home with any. You're supposed to have at least a soundbite. And he tried and he rushed his soundbite even. He'll defend Donald Trump, not democracy. Yeah, he had to rush it at the end. So, I got to get this out. This is what, remember, look how many times he looked down to his notes. How many times JD Vance looked down to his notes? Big zero.
Robert,
that's somebody who's a naturally skilled speaker versus a guy who made memes of his face all night.
And I'm a knucklehead at times.
I mean, it's done.
I made some videos years ago. I had my nephews make them of when Joe Biden said, sometimes I'm stupid. And we just tagged it like with 20 other crazy, dumb things he'd done over his life. Something. and that's what he just did. He just pulled a Joe Biden. I'm a knucklehead. I'm a knucklehead. I'm a knucklehead. I mean, you don't want to be the meme moment. Now, by the way, I still won the bet on the Haitians. Only the moderator mentioned the Haitians. He didn't say Haitians.
That's true.
It was generic.
That's why I hate these debates. That's why I hate those bets.
He wants it to be a generic immigrant group that everybody out there can relate. You say Haitians and people think, people like to eat animals.
Yeah, you're right. But that's why I hate these semantic bets. Robert Hall, let me read a few of these. We got Amazing Lorenzo in Rumble says, Vance stuck the landing. I tend to agree. We got Prednizer, PR Designer 02. Walz is a jerk who went after Stacey Stan, who owned this really successful waffle restaurant because the Walz said she had to sell her restaurant to pay his fines. Lucy the dog. There are over 300,000 children who die in the womb, and Walz thinks the problem is the gun the person has. World Population Review, we got that one. We need to flip the gun violence. This is from Snuggle Struggle. Flip the gun violence narrative on its head. Americans send youth to unsecured buildings where security is prohibited. Absolutely. You have an armed security guard at a bank, but not at a school. What's wrong with it? You think money's worth more than children? Idiots. Abortion in Minnesota is legal at all stages of pregnancy. Zaria, we checked that one up. It's one of them. They have no restrictions at any point of pregnancy. Walz is gaslighting us over abortion. The clot shots were claimed safe and effective to pregnant women when it wasn't, and it was the Biden admin that's responsible for Roe v. Wade being tossed out. I agree with that. Who's that from? Snuggle Struggle's on fire tonight. Tim Walz promised Minnesota the $18 billion state surplus back into our pockets. He spent that surplus on illegal immigrants for free homes, free medical. Minnesota's now $8 billion in debt. Snuggle Struggle. Tim Walz is lying in Minnesota. I know from my own home evaluation, along with multiple neighbors, our home evaluations have doubled under Biden. 2 property tax increases over the past 3 years.
Trying to gaslight on immigration. Oh, immigration's way down. Trying to gaslight on everything, on all the jobs that have been created and how everything's great economically. All you're doing is insulting the voters you need to vote for you. Like, compare that to JD Vance, who recognized even on issues that Republicans are considered vulnerable. He's like, yeah, you're right. And here's why we're going to do better and we need to do better because here's your concern. I hear your concern. I'm going to repeat your concern to you and to show you my sensitivity, sympathy, and empathy with it. That's the difference between the two of them. One is a teacher trying to not screw up his big moment on the stage. The other one is a natural who knew exactly who to talk to and definitely, as the chatter said, hit the landing.
JD's amazing, and I'll read this just so nobody accuses me of not reading it. Gents, I'm going to get a very different take on the efficacy of the Iran missile strikes. Some saying they are intentionally not effective, others saying a lot of damage. I think they are
exactly the case with Iran. I mean, this is what I've said. Iran likes to look like they're standing up without actually getting into a direct hot war with Israel.
I can vouch, Robert, that you have said that multiple times in the past. I think that, I mean, Israel's got its dome. I don't know what's protecting it, but
the Iron Dome's going to go down. What it does, it looks good visuals. They say, we announced 5,000 missiles attacked. When you knew the missile, it was like Trump with Syria. Remember that? Like he had the big things of the missiles going, and he had the footage set up from the ship and all the rest. He didn't mention, he called everybody up. Hey, make sure everybody's gone so nobody dies.
Well, it's not just that, but could you imagine like one of the Iranian missiles lands and kills, I don't know, any one of the 20% Arab population in Israel? I mean, they're doing things that are just, it would be stupid if they succeed.
Right. I mean, they're taking action that they know has the least likelihood of being effective. So isn't that intentional? The Iranians are many things. They're not dumb. I mean, the Persian culture has produced some of the most brilliant minds in history. I don't agree with the current Iranian politics, just to be clear, in case somebody tries to take that out of.
Well, now they're going to take that out of context. Okay, hold on. In Viva Barnes Law, .locals.com, tequila reposado, $2. Robert Barnes, thank you for the explanation of how intelligent candidates utilize objective, accurate polling to properly identify critical target voters in essential discussion points. Brilliant. I agree. It's amazing. Spam Ranger, leftist social policies are the real cause of mass shootings. Let's see what these
are. It's particularly, it's celebrating in the media. It's the number one reason. If you don't celebrate in the media, it doesn't happen. Look, it never happened when kids were bringing guns to school, which used to be commonplace in America.
Well, but I would say it never happened before mass prescription of SSRIs.
I mean, that's a secondary problem. But the primary one, they've studied it. If the kids believe they would get no coverage, they don't do it. Why do they pick schools? They'll get the most coverage.
Yeah, but there's no, and they're the softest of soft targets.
Well, and because there's no security present.
Coddlefish says, really disappointed on how Vance avoided the Jan 6 question. I don't think he avoided it.
No,
he could hit it straight on.
Look, he goes, I don't think that election was done correctly, but that's not the most important issue facing the country. And again, getting into a J6 debate, that's where Democrats want the discussion. Vance wants a discussion on peace and prosperity. Trump gave you peace and prosperity. Harris gave you war and poverty. Let's talk about that future for the next 4 years.
Sadaka says, I know people who've been dropped from their insurance because of their diagnosis. I worry about my husband. He has a rare form of cancer called cesarean syndrome.
It's illegal for them to prohibit. So you get dropped from coverage, but then you can get reinsured. They cannot, based on pre-existing conditions, deny you coverage. Now, there are economic issues in the healthcare industry with how that works. And that's what Trump created a temporary fix for and wants a longer-term fix for.
As Barnes said, Walz did a terrible job. Said that Walz knew school shooters.
He hung out with them apparently. I'll hang out with the school shooters.
I'm wondering if he actually did. And I think we got the rest. We got the rest of these, so I think we're good. This was the tweet from Axelrod. It said, "Here's the thing: VPs don't make policy; presidents do. Who wants to talk about the pensiers?" And then people are ribbing. All right,
that's the problem. You can't run on me. Even Mark, remember you highlighted this. Mark Cuban couldn't answer it. Because like, okay, so you're saying Harris deserves credit for anything good happened that under Biden, but has no accountability at all for anything bad that happened? Because how do you do that?
That's called double standards.
Yeah, and this is why I said that this is why she made it. It was a second reason why she made a terrible candidate to replace Biden.
Yeah.
First, she's a terrible candidate. She's dumb as a doorknob. I've been telling people this for 15 years. I dealt with her office in court. Dumbest lawyer I ever dealt with in court. There's a reason she failed the bar. She's not bright. She's just dumb as a doorknob. Just is. She can memorize, and that's it. If you memorize, she can get up and do the robotic thing. She can't do anything spontaneous. You even see with Walz how nervous he is, double checking his notes all night, right? These are not natural, authentic people. I mean, If I was prepping him, I would have prepped him not to do that all night. But notice JD Vance, not once did he look at any notes. It was just boom, boom, look, boom, boom, boom. A little bit, what the heck? Boom, boom, boom. A couple of nice memeable moments. Nothing negative from tonight that they can highlight. Nothing. Nada. Zero. Zilch. They came in here. We're going to get JD Vance. We got these two younger women, and we're going to take them out, especially with young women, undecided voters, and that's going to push Harris back over the top. And instead, he just crushed it because they badly underestimated who he is.
Robert, we've done it. What do you have on for tomorrow? You got real law work tomorrow?
Oh, definitely. But we'll be back with Bourbon with Barnes at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Amazing.
9-ish Eastern time, Wednesday night and Thursday night.
All right, amazing. And I'll be live at 12:30-ish tomorrow, which is like 12:30 or 12:31 tomorrow. And we'll probably talk about this and other stuff. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everyone else out there, we're going to end this all. And it's been good. It's been great. Okay, good night. See you tomorrow, people. Peeps.